All right, by my clock, we are at 10 o'clock. So, Janet, are you ready to get started?
Ready to go.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our very first virtual Marine Science Day. I'm so excited. My name is Cinnamon Moffett, and I'm the Research Program Manager at Oregon State University's Hatfield Marine Science Center, and I will be your host for the main stage talks today. Shannon Reed, who is on your screen potentially at this time, will be our technical support. So if you have any technical questions, you're welcome to put those into the chat and she will support us. She is also controlling our screen share today. So you might hear, next slide, please. That is Shannon. So thank you very much, Shannon, for being our support. Much appreciated. For everyone online, I just wanted to let you know that this is a webinar format. That means that your mics, cameras and screen shares have been disabled, but we would love for you to ask us any questions that you might have by using the chat function of the webinar. You can find that chat box usually at the bottom of your screen, but possibly at the top. You click that little pop-out button and you're able to type in questions for anybody to see, and we will be answering those at the end. I also wanted to let folks know that we are recording today's talks, and they will be posted on the Marine Science Day webpage in a couple of days. So if you're unable to see them all, you'll be able to see them there in a couple of days. Like I just said, we have several talks on the main stage today. There's a total of 5. So just doing a little preview, our next talk will start at 11:15 on this very same link, where we have Sarah Hamilton talking about the conservation outlook for sunflower sea stars. And again, if you need any more information about upcoming talks on the main stage for Marine Science Day, you can go to the main stage area room tab on the website and find information there. But I don't want to take any more time because we are very excited for today's keynote speaker, Janet Essley, who is going to be sharing her perspective about what is the beauty of science. So before we get started, I just wanted to give you a little background on Janet. Janet Essley is a Northwest artist, muralist, and artist educator, recognized for excellence in all 3 roles by the Washington State Art Commission. She has led collaborative murals with youth and community groups for the last 30 years in the US, Mexico, and Central America. She is best known in the scientific and conservation community for her work, cultural cartography of red knots, which has been exhibited nationally and abroad. And Janet's journey into this dance between art and science started to take off when she took a break from college as an undergraduate. And that break happened to just last 20 years. And during that time, she had some amazing adventures, one of which we've talked about, her and I, where she helped with a study of gray whales in Baja, Mexico. Now, as a lay naturalist and a citizen scientist, she continues to participate in technical support of field studies and education advocacy for a variety of marine biology projects. I invited Janet here today to be our keynote speaker nearly 2 years ago. And due to the cancellation of Marine Science Day last year and our conversion of marine science to a virtual format this year, I am so excited that we actually get to have the presentation that her and I have been talking about for years. I first wanted her to speak with us when I saw her presentation on red knots, which really did change the way I thought about science communication. And so I am just really excited for Janet to be here and to share with us. So Janet, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Cinnamon. And Shannon, could we go back to the last slide just for a little bit? Thank you. It is indeed a delight and honor to be here for Marine Science Day. It is a double honor because first I get to come as an artist offering my perspective on the beauty of my sister disciplines in the sciences. And secondly, because as a very old-fashioned artist, speaking to people at a very modern state-of-the-art research facility, I find myself in the very center of a teeter-totter, and that is in a fascinating place. As Cinnamon said, she asked me to do this 2 years ago. We got postponed last spring. And because of that postponement, if people ask me 20 years from now, what did you do during COVID times? I will be able to very truthfully say, I thought about the beauty of science. And that journey took me to the outer reaches of the universe and back to the beginning of time. And I hope to share some of that excitement with you. In January of this year, I was pressed for a title for my talk. And I thought it would be a good idea to get down some definitions. Now we can go on to the next slide. Thank you, Shannon. And being very old-fashioned, I got out my hardbound copy of the 2001 Random House College Dictionary. And their definition of beauty was being pleasing to the senses and or deeply satisfying to the mind, with a footnote such as something aesthetically pleasing as in art or nature. Interestingly, I had asked at the 2 years ago a group or various scientists, not in a group, but scientists from various fields, what they thought was the beauty of science. And what they said was the first beauty of science was curiosity. And the second was use of the scientific method. And the third was the symmetry of nature, which, as best as I can tell from my research over the last year, is a science. Symmetry is a science word for beauty. So my artist logic says, oh, this is easy. Senses and mind equal understanding. Understanding is deeply satisfying and therefore beautiful. Curiosity, a sense, plus scientific method, a way of organizing information about that curiosity, is also deeply pleasing to the mind. Understanding equals beauty, and hence beauty is the essence of science. Seems pretty simple, but for some reason, philosophers have been talking about this question for literally thousands of years. So let's explore some of that. Next slide. As Cinnamon said, I have worked for many years on a cultural cartography of red knots, which is a way to map the migration patterns of a single species of shorebird over all the world's ocean and to all the continents except Antarctica. So instead of doing it the usual way where you have names of places, references to geography that we're all familiar with, I chose to reference location through styles of art that have been practiced sometime in human history near that area. And so this one, it references the coast of China because of the stylistic way the Chinese painted waves and the colors, especially used in a method of art called blue underglazed ceramics, which was very important in the 15th century for the Chinese, and interestingly enough, for world politics, world economics. More on that later. But when looking at this with our senses, we see these deep blue colors that tickle our eyes. We see these wonderful curved lines that tickle our eyes and remind us of movement. And we see these concentrated, energetic blue bird forms all dashing to the right side of this rectangle, and that is pleasing to the senses. But if you add to that all the information about how blue underglaze painting ceramics came to be, and all the effects in art history before and after that on the ecology of China and the politics of China and the economics of China, and how that then migrated itself to the Netherlands and adapted to the cultural references there, and how what was going on at the Netherlands at the time that they wanted blue underglaze ceramic images relates to all the science on thousands of different species that was being done at the time. So if you can get down from that sense of excitement and add to it all that the scientists know about these birds and how these little concentrated balls of energy are able to fly from one end of the earth to the next, and how they gather enough food and energy to be able to do this, it's like being at the center of a very exciting teeter-totter. Next slide. So we've just migrated from China to the Gulf Coast of Texas. And we're seeing a variety of shorebirds on a coastal tidal flat with certain weather conditions in the background, and we can see all that. Now, it turns out that we actually don't see any of that. Our eyes get tickled by photons coming in, that some of which relate to some structures in some cells and others don't, and those cells send nerve impulses up to a variety of places in the brain where they are processed and then put back together into an image in the mind. And what we actually think we see is an image in our mind constructed from a variety of information impulses. Now, for me, that makes this picture a whole lot more interesting because of what is happening in my mind that I now know about through science. So I also have the beauty of the senses and the beauty of the mind. And I know that in fact, the mind is what is processing the senses, and the mind has to go back and check in with the senses to make sure it's the picture that it is developed is accurate. And fortunately, we all do this in pretty much the same way, or we would be bumping into each other all the time. So those things that we see in this painting, shapes and colors and lines and a sense of space and a sense of movement, are all things that our eyes are able to get senses of, and our mind puts together into this picture. Now, we came with this equipment at birth, and how that got here comes from our parents and their parents and their parents back to the beginning of time. And some of us have different senses than others, and that's all totally fascinating in how it all works. So here's another piece of the picture, or as we look at a place on the teeter-totter of all these different things happening. And let's take a break with the next slide while we recover from this one. One of the many things that we are able to see and use all the time is patterns. And our eyes and our mind actually fills in patterns that we don't see. So your mind can see the patterns of these all these interconnecting circles, which are imaginary calabash designs from West Africa, that all fit together, and your mind, depending on how far you let it loose, can imagine those circles connecting with other circles, connecting with other circles on into infinity. But I want to bring your attention now to that large brown dot in the center of the smallest circle. There are 5 starfish-like symmetrically other dark spots around that, which represent turtle heads. But this particular dot is the center of this pattern that goes on and on out into space. We see this dot, but we are also curious about this dot, and which comes first. We are born with a sense of curiosity. We are born with, if we have sight, with senses of sight or smell or sound, which all work in essentially the same way. But which comes first, the curiosity or the sight? Do we open our eyes and go, oh my goodness gracious, what is all this stuff? What is all this stuff being curious? Or do we start out with curiosity? What's out there? How can I find out? And suddenly we discover that we have a tool, which is our eyes, that helps us understand what's going on around us. Now, between that sense of curiosity and our sense of sight and smell and touch and all those, there is yet another sense, which is the mind putting it all together. And that is our sense of creativity. And it is enormous creativity of the mind that puts all these different things we see around us together into something that is deeply satisfying, because we can understand it, and it helps us move through the world and interact with other beings and forces of the wind and the weather and the hail and everything else. And then it allows us to make decisions about how we want to move us as the center of existence through all these other things. I want to take a moment here to think a little bit about creativity, in that it is often associated with artists, but I don't think it has anything particular to do with art any more than it has to do with science, in that scientists, having become curious about something, find immensely creative ways to look at, test out their senses of what they looked at, find new ways to look at it. If they run out of options of satisfying their endless curiosity with those things, they say, how, more curiosity, how can I imagine, create a tool that will help me to do this? And the creativity with which scientists are organizing their experiments and finding new ways to collect and process information is really amazing. and wonderful as an artist to join in the experience of creativity with the scientists. Next slide. We've hopped back across the Atlantic to the southeastern coast of the United States, and we are looking at a picture that resembles a quilt for all sorts of totally amazing art history, reasons and connections that I could talk about for a long time, but it contains the red knots, images of the red knots in that quilted fashion. It contains images of horseshoe crabs. The eastern coast of the United States is the only place in the world where horseshoe crabs and red knots and other shorebirds relate in this very particular way that happens only here. Now, in my cartography, I have red knots as the center of existence, and you could learn everything there is to know about the nature of the universe using red knots as the center of your perspective, or you could do the same from the perspective of horseshoe crabs, which are also totally amazing beings. And because they've been here on Earth way longer than we have, from their perspective, the time of the dinosaurs was a weekend visit. But they, from that perspective, us looking at horseshoe crabs as the center, we could also get to the ends of the universe, just as we could with the red knots as a center. And that's a very interesting symmetry, that center point. But I want to tell you something about what happened to me when I painted this painting that I think is something that likewise happens to scientists doing their experiments. I had lots of time on my hand last summer because of COVID and the fire season here in the Northwest. I had known that I wanted to paint a painting about the amazing and complex relationship between red knots and horseshoe crabs for several years. I had looked at the scientific information about them many times. I had looked at the art history information about them many times, but I couldn't figure out any way to make a painting that somehow combined those things. But I had time on my hands last summer, or on my mind, I should say. So I decided to look at it all again. I reviewed all the scientific information I had. I reviewed all the art history and art styles and information that I had about this style. And at one point in reading over the art information, I came across one sentence which I had not seen before, or not processed before, not noticed before. And that one sentence was the big bang that put the universe of this picture together. Now, this doesn't mean that this was an easy painting, because I had to balance in this painting all the energy forces that light and dark and different colors and lines and shapes and patterns and movement, all those things which are part of our brain, how our brain and mind works, to balance all those forces to make this picture, which is very symmetrical and therefore beautiful in not only an eye-teasing way, but I believe as scientists mean the word symmetry, the beauty of symmetry. To calm down from all that excitement, let's go to the next slide. This painting also has in it the same symmetry as the last one, although it looks very different, and it does not look like how we commonly think of symmetry as the left side looking the same as the right side. So I'm just gathering my thoughts here a minute, because now I want to go on to the next part of this presentation. What I just not quite yet. What I just showed you was paintings that I already have done. What I'm going to show you is paintings that I want to do in the future. And those paintings need to be about something very, very modern, which I'll explain in a minute. And so they need to be done in a very, very modern style of art. And the data visualizations from the Marine Hatfield Center are the perfect model. Now we can go on to the next slide, of the style of art that I want to use in this next series of paintings. Now, this is a satellite image taken by various very creative and interesting devices. And the data from this has been transferred by technological magic to computers on Earth, and then taken by scientists through amazing algorithms and computer programs to bring us this image, which appeals to our senses. This apparently has to do, from a scientific point of view, with the surface temperature of the ocean. Now, from my point of view, this painting, this image is going to become my first painting in this series of paintings, and this one is going to be called The Rainbow Ocean. And it has to be very modern in its style, because I want to do an update of a very old legend from China. This old legend from China tells the story of how the dragon became a symbol of peace in China. Now, dragons in Chinese culture are wise and benevolent and kind, and help us all to survive. So, but the story that have been told for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, they change through time, and they change through time. I just got a notice that my internet is unstable. They change through time, and this is one version that I really like. And the story goes something like this. At the very, very beginning of time, there was just a few people on Earth, and some of them lived near the ocean, and some of them lived in the mountains, and some of them lived in the valleys, etc. And after a while, in each of these different places, the people started saying, we need an animal that can symbolize how and where we live, sort of like the ducks and the beavers. But in China, they had different animals which they chose. And the children along the ocean chose the fish. And the children in the mountains chose the crane, etc. And everything went along very well for eons, until we get to a time where each of these different groups of people start saying, we're better than you. our way of doing things is the right way. You should do everything the way we want to do it. And pretty soon, every different group of people was fighting one with another, and everybody was very mean, and it was all very stressful and unsettling. And finally, the children of China said, "No, this must stop." They said, "We need a symbol that is a symbol of all of us, that will remind us that we need to share and collaborate and all work together, and it will be a symbol of peace." And the children along the shoreline said, "Here, take the scales of my fish that shine like the rainbow when the fish leaps out of the water into the sunshine." And the other children offered parts of their symbols. And so you can see why we have the rainbow ocean in my updated version of this story. Next slide. When I do the children's book of the story, this will be another part of the story. And this data visualization from the center that apparently describes to people who understand it the surface salinity of the ocean off the Oregon coast. But to me, and how I'm going to use it in my story, is the great firestorm of anger and distrust and conflict that is coming, wafting over the world, until the children of China say, "No, this must stop." And that's the line where this firestorm suddenly stops. And I'm not quite sure whether this is going to be firestorm or this is going to be the magic line. Those are all things to work on later. Before that in the story, next slide, please, I'm going to use this image as a model. Now, this is overlays in data visualization of ocean currents over those salinity readings that we saw before. When I do this picture, I am going to change the color of all those arrows. So, and in the new colors I'm going to use, which I don't know exactly what they are yet, I will have to experiment, are going to stand for all the different people from all the different villages fighting with each other. And again, I'm not sure what the title of this one is going to be. You can see this foreshadowing of peace in the future, and that little purple line coming in from Oregon, which is the internal awareness that we all need to be peaceful with each other, and that very center of our beings, which is one of sharing and cooperation. Next slide. Before that in the story is going to be this model, which for scientists is a graphic of the concentrations of aragonite in the ocean layers, and which is really important, becomes the total basis of all the food chain of the ocean. And so think of this slide the next time you come to have clams at a restaurant or a mussel bake out on the beach. But for me, this is time when everybody has their rosy glasses on and they can see that all this conflict they're generating could lead to something bad, but they're still in denial. Oh, it's okay, you know, I'm just doing my thing, whatever. So that's what this slide, this when I do the painting of this slide, that's what it's going to represent for me in my story. Next slide, please. There's a lot of pieces that I haven't found yet, models that I haven't found yet, but I know they are in the computers somewhere at the center for what happens between the last slide and this one, which is a magic reinterpretation of sonar readings of the landforms at the bottom of the ocean. But in my story, it's going to be the very beginning of life on the planet ocean, which is what Earth really ought to be called, because of how much ocean is the center and affects everything else here. But this is the beginning. And when I find the other images, this whole landscape, seascape, waterscape of space in between the bottom of the ocean and the surface will be full of living beings and all their wonderful biodiversity, etc. So next slide. I am planning on having a CD or whatever has developed by the time I get done with my paintings, that is a soundtrack for this story. And this is going to be the cover. It is a spectrograph, I'm not sure what is the proper name to call it, of bioacoustics sounds generated by animals underneath in the Antarctic Ocean over a period of 18 months, from which scientists learn all sorts of fascinating things about the movements of the animal and changes within the ocean because of those movements of the animals that affect, because of the way one thing leads to another, the entire ocean, the entire planet, and us eventually. So this is going to be the cover of my soundtrack for this story. My first thought when I saw this image was, boy, that is a really cool way of writing music. Now, I can't make any more sense of it than I can of what we usually think of as written music, but I think it's really beautiful. And all these images together that you have seen that I am going to paint in the future, plus the ones that I haven't found yet, which will fill in that space between the bottom of the ocean floor and the surface. That updated story seems to me to fill in that which I think is a final and essential beauty of science, which is how scientists and the knowledge that they are able to gain in their oh so creative ways with all their diligent and hard work and the difficulty changing their minds about things, after testing and seeing if what they saw and thought was true was really true by going back to their senses. And I find it terribly exciting and interesting that even with all this wonderful information that scientists are able to gather through their extrasensory devices like sonar and all the satellite images from radio waves and gamma rays and visible light rays and ultralight and etc., that they gather all these information and they have data about them, and they still have to go back and check with their own eyes and check with their own ears that the way all our extrasensory devices and machines are suggesting the real world, the scientists are going back and checking with their own eyes and ears that it's actually true, and the machines are doing it properly. And so the data information that they're getting is accurate. And it's essential that it's accurate because all our lives depend upon it. And that is the final essential beauty of science that is offered to us. Now, that was a lot of words. I don't know if I made my case for my perspective on the beauty of science. We can talk about that in the chat room. But I have always thought that I was way better with pictures than I am with words. So I want to finish up with this next slide, which you all earlier saw at the beginning of this talk with words superimposed upon it. But this explains everything I just said. It is the teeter-totter, the center of the teeter-totter between being the old-fashioned artist at the new state-of-the-art research facility. It is how our eyes bring in information and process it through the mind to reach an understanding at the center, and how even with the scientists and their curiosity, they have to constantly go back to those visual sense, that their true senses of what they see outside. True is a very interesting word that philosophers have been talking about for thousands of years relative to beauty and science, etc. But it basically says all that I just talked about. An interesting question to me with this is whether the painting is done or not. And if anybody wants to talk in the chat room about that, we can do that. I had 18 months to think about this, and it was very interesting. I didn't do this alone. I had help in directing my thinking towards look at this and look at that and think about this and think about that from a variety of different people. I want to acknowledge them in the next slide. Next slide. Is my mute out? There we go. In the fields of the art, the following people from various different art disciplines. That first one, Roger Essley, is my twin brother. And a variety of very important people from various fields of science. And that first one, David Ward, is the one who, through whom I eventually was able to participate in marine biology field tests with whales, and then as a support art educator with scientists in Mexico, working on international projects, because Brant geese in that case fly through many what we think of as countries of the world right now. For any of you artist types here that are interested in science, A Beautiful Question by the physicist Frank Wilczek is a very interesting read. And any of you science types interested in art, The Age of Insight by Eric Hendel is an equally interesting read. If any of you want to see more of my paintings or contact me, the information is on this next slide. And there we have it. In your scientist mind, which came to you at birth, with your curiosity, and in your artist mind, which came to you at birth in music or dance or visual arts or poetry, be curious. And when you go out into the center today, and I know you're all here because you're curious, explore. Become more curious and come back throughout the year to explore more and be more curious and explore more. And remember always, no matter what you do, to enjoy the beauty of life that is all around you and the beauty of science that helps us gain a more fuller and exciting understanding of how that life works. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so very much, Janet. Much appreciated. I wanted to just start us off on our question and answer section by reading a few things that is coming into the chat.
I'm going to have to put my glasses on, my extrasensory devices.
So the first one that I see is Janet is such a fantastic storyteller, in addition to being an incredibly creative and gifted artist. So that is a comment that's come to you. So I just wanted to read that. Other things that are coming in is I love this presentation. I enjoyed the Red Knot talk at Hatfield a while ago, and Janet's perspective is fantastic. We also have one that says, Janet, you have certainly tickled my curiosity. So I'm hoping that there we go, that for everybody who joined us this morning, that'll send you off into the rest of our virtual exhibits with that curiosity and maybe looking at some of the presentations in a different light. Another one we have here is she helps me see the world through a different lens, which I love as well.
Having had cataract surgery last spring, I really get that part about a different lens. It's a completely different world and absolutely wonderful.
Wonderful. And I'm not going to read all of these now because they're coming in so quickly I can't keep up, but they're standing ovations and thank you so much and so thought-provoking. I do want to encourage anybody who's in our virtual world, if you have any questions for Janet, go ahead and put them in the chat. We have a few minutes with her, so if you want to pick her brain, ask any questions, feel free to do that now.
In subjects of art or science. Remember, I'm not a real scientist. I have a master's degree in art.
Which I just learned. Love the combination of science and art, which I have not seen before as an artist. Love this presentation very much. So to speak to that, for me, I am not an artist in that way. And so to see this presented in this way was also great for me, Janet, as always. Wonderful.
What do you mean you're an artist in that way?
I'm not an artist. I see myself as a scientist, but in looking at the things that you present to me, I question and I challenge and I think about the things that I do in a different way, which I just really enjoy.
Well, we're all artists and we're all scientists. And that is true in so many ways. It comes to us from birth. And some of us wander off eventually into the art fields, and some of us wander off into the science fields. And each of those fields is a center, which will get you eventually through all those interconnections to the edge of the universe in the beginning of time. But you can also get there from the perspective of art, which does the same thing. And that what's symmetrical about that is the point in the middle, that they are just different perspectives on the same thing. And we each will engage in both of them to the extent of our desires. So some people engage in art through what they wear. Some people engage in art through how they cook, with the art of the senses. And the foodies who do gourmet food are connecting the visual sense of what a meal presentation looks like with the tastes of what it's going to taste like. And those two things working together create something new. So, but we're also all scientists. None of us would be here as alive today if we weren't constantly being curious and testing our image of the world against what our senses are telling us.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Yes, you're an artist.
Thank you.
And I can appreciate, and part of being an artist, part of art is not just making art, it is viewing art. And we say this, that a piece of art is not done until somebody looks at it, because you are going to see with your eyes things that are slightly different than what I see with my eyes. And it's the combination of those two eyes and minds that make something different. And if you take all the eyes and minds that look at a piece of art, you have us out to the end of the universe again. But I can see that you have this picture on your wall behind you. And that is you making choices about beauty, about art. So you have extended the conversation from the artist who produced that picture to your wall, and you're here today, and now you're projecting it to all the people that are here at the webinar. So there we go.
Wonderful.
On and on, forever and ever.
I want to read a couple of questions that did come in. Do you have a recommended reading for a teenage artist / scientist?
A teenage artist / scientist. Well, boy, any of the images that scientists used and to be aware of were made by artists before the development of the photograph, which is only, 100 years old. So, boy, reading anything about any of them, and especially drawing pictures. So what just came to mind to me was this wonderful book called The Cry of the Seabird. If you're interested in seabirds, which are fascinating. And they have some beautiful pictures, beautiful drawings in them at the beginning of each chapter. And so the science of that is really interesting. But then my recommendation is, no matter what you read, to go do a little research, be curious, find some pictures of that, and then draw the picture from direct observation. So for example, in this slide you're looking at, that drawing of those two shorebirds was originally done by John James Audubon. Read a history of John James Audubon. Get his book of Birds of North, a copy of Birds of North America, and read all the biographical information about him. Fascinating. I mean, that's what a teenage artist scientist does. That's what Audubon did. But by looking at that image of his drawing, drew it as exactly as I could see it without changing anything. That is an incredibly complex project that takes going back to your senses thousands of times from whatever you thought your mind saw, and it drew down, and then you have to check it against reality. And that's the process of science, the process of art. And the best way is to keep drawing. Another, boy, depending on how old this teenager is, see if you can find a book. I don't know what it's called, but if you look up a scientist, a neuroscientist called Santiago Ramon y Cajal, Cajal, his drawings of nerve cells were how scientists figured out how the brain works. And those drawings, which are totally beautiful because that's what he did as a teenager, and he thought that only artists can become scientists. Those drawings have been exhibited nationally for many years. There's been exhibits at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and all the other major museums. So if you look up Santiago Ramon y Cajal, you should be able to find a book about his stuff somewhere, and the science and the pictures are really great. I sometimes get National Geographic and I never read it. I just look at the pictures because they tell me so much. So National Geographic, Smithsonian Magazine, any of those other things are completely wonderful.
So Janet, we had a request, and I'm not sure with your computer setup whether it's possible. Could you put the name of Santiago in the chat?
Let's see, chat.
So click that little chat pop out.
I did the chat. Okay, down here at the bottom.
You should be able to type.
Type message here. I'm a very old-fashioned person. This was my very first PowerPoint.
Which we appreciate, and you pulled off seamlessly.
Ramon, which has an accent over it, Spanish scientist, neuroscientist at the turn of the way long time ago, last century, so early 1900s. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful drawings. Frederick Heckel is I'm not sure I got his name spelled right, Fred, D-E-R-I-C-K-H-A-E-C-K-E-L or something like that, who through the magic extrasensory device of his microscope drew the beautiful, 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 beautiful drawings of diatoms in the ocean and all the other very symmetrical creatures of the ocean. And look up him and find a book about him. I know there's coloring books out of just his drawings that are completely wonderful. And if your teenager's a girl, look up Maria Janelle, what's her middle name? Mary, Maria something or other, who is
return for us to see the words that you've typed.
What's that? Oh, I have to hit return. Okay. She was an artist scientist in the Netherlands in the 1600s who went to Indonesia, a woman going to Indonesia at that period of time on old sailing boats, and drew amazing and wonderful pictures of, did that do it? Amazing and wonderful pictures of plants and beetles and everything, just beautiful drawings of all the biodiversity of life in Indonesia, which the Europeans had never seen before, and excited them so much that they went out and explored some more. Which was, but anyway, what do I want to say about that? Just wonderful paintings. There was a postage stamp, U.S. postage stamp made of her work not too many years ago when they were honoring artists. And so she is also well known. And if you can find a biography of her and just look at her drawings and try to reproduce them, you will have lots of fun. So,
So Mary Markland, our librarian here at Hatfield, has put in a link so you can find
oh, too
information
cool.
there. So thank you
Oh,
very
great.
much, Mary.
Thank you.
I just wanted to remind folks in our last minute that if you wanted to contact Janet, she has graciously given us her information on the slides. You can reach out to her directly or check out her website. And for everybody else, I just wanted to remind you that you have about 15 minutes to go explore all the other exhibits and then come back, just log back in on this very same link, and we'll get started at 11:15 with our next speaker, who is Sarah Hamilton. So Janet, thank you so much for allowing us to walk through your brain with you and explore this journey.
Thank you so much for inspiring my next art series.
That's amazing as well. We'll have you back when we are a little further along on that. All right, everybody online, we will see you again, possibly in 15 minutes. If not, enjoy the rest of Marine Science Day. And Janet, we will for sure keep the conversation going. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye now.
How do I?